Auschwitz was the heart of the Nazi killing machine, a place designed for death on an unimaginable scale. Every detail was planned. Trains ran like clockwork. Gas chambers worked day and night. Bodies were burned in giant crematoria. Here, prisoners were tortured, starved, and forced into brutal labor. Doctors carried out cruel experiments in the name of science. For decades, much of what happened remained hidden. The Nazis destroyed evidence, silenced witnesses, and locked away records. But questions remain. What secrets were buried here before the SS fled? What horrors unfolded in the basement of Block 10? And what experiments were so terrible that even the Nazis tried to erase them from history? From barracks to killing ground, the birth of Auschwitz. Auschwitz didn't begin as the monstrous death factory history remembers. Its beginnings were almost mundane. In the spring of 1940, the Nazi regime was looking for a site in occupied Poland that could hold a growing number of political prisoners. On April 27th of that year, Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, signed the order that would set Auschwitz in motion. The location was Oświęcim, a modest Polish town the Germans renamed Auschwitz, set amid farmland and rail lines, far from major cities yet perfectly positioned for secrecy and transportation efficiency. It had a perfect mix of features for the Nazis' purposes: a railway station that connected to 44 main lines and a set of old Austro-Hungarian military barracks that could be reused without the cost or time of new construction. It was far enough from the public eye to keep its operations hidden, yet close enough to supply routes and labor pools. In May 1940, Rudolf Höss was appointed the first commandant. Höss had served at Dachau and Sachsenhausen and was known not for outbursts of violence but for his strict adherence to orders. The Nazis valued his cold efficiency. Under his leadership, Auschwitz began as a prison for those the regime saw as threats: Polish political leaders, priests, intellectuals, and members of the resistance. The first transport arrived on June 14, 1940. 728 prisoners stepped off the train, all Polish men. They were stripped of their identities within hours. Names were replaced by numbers, which were later tattooed on their arms. Their civilian clothes were taken, replaced with striped uniforms. Even in these early days, brutality was constant. The new arrivals were put to work expanding the camp, tearing down walls, digging ditches, and building fences. Many of them slept on straw-filled sacks that quickly became infested with lice. What began as a set of barracks for captured political enemies was soon becoming something far more sinister. Auschwitz was now primed for its next phase, one in which its operations would be as calculated as they were lethal. The machinery of control, structure, and expansion. The first camp, later known as Auschwitz I, was never meant to be a place of survival. From the moment prisoners entered, every part of the system was designed to break them. The barracks, built decades earlier for soldiers, now held several times the intended number of people. Wooden bunks were stacked in tiers, each space barely wide enough for a man to lie flat. The straw mattresses quickly turned into breeding grounds for lice and fleas. The air in the barracks was damp in the winter, stifling in the summer, and always thick with the smell of unwashed bodies. Latrines were communal troughs, filthy and overflowing. There was no privacy, no comfort, and no reprieve from the constant stench. The daily schedule was a weapon in itself. At 4:30 each morning, before the first light, prisoners were driven outside for Appell, the roll call. They stood in long lines, motionless, while SS guards counted and recounted every prisoner. In winter, men froze in thin uniforms, their fingers and ears turning blue. In summer, the sun scorched them, and the heat made the smell of decay heavier in the air. The roll calls could last for hours. If a prisoner died during the night, his body was not removed. Instead, it was propped upright so the count would match. Survival often depended on the ability to remain standing, despite hunger, exhaustion, and illness. To keep control, the SS relied on a hierarchy among prisoners. Some were assigned as kapos, inmate supervisors who led work details and enforced rules. Most kapos were chosen from criminal prisoners, not political ones, and they often became as brutal as the guards. Their survival depended on results, and they used beatings, shouting, and intimidation to keep others in line. This system divided the prisoners, breaking solidarity and ensuring that control came from both above and within. Punishments were as much a part of daily life as work. Public whippings were common, carried out on wooden frames in front of the assembled prisoners. Others were hung by their arms behind their backs, their shoulders dislocating under their own weight. The most feared place was Block 11, known as the Death Block. Inside, cells were so small that prisoners could only stand, and there was little air to breathe. Some were left there until they died from suffocation or thirst. Executions by shooting took place in the courtyard outside. Against the black wall, the bricks permanently darkened by bullets and blood. By 1941, Auschwitz had grown beyond a holding facility. It became an autonomous institution within the SS, with its own budget, authority, and expansion plans. That summer, Himmler visited and gave the order to triple the camp's capacity. The plan included a massive new complex, Auschwitz II, Birkenau, on swampy ground about 2 miles away. The location was chosen carefully, close enough to the main camp to share resources, yet hidden enough to keep its purpose away from prying eyes. The ground was treacherous, waterlogged in spring and fall, frozen solid in winter. Prisoners were forced to drain the land and lay foundations, many collapsing under the weight of the work. Thousands died during construction before a single barrack was ready for use. While Birkenau rose from the swamp, decisions were being made far from the camp that would define its role. In January 1942, senior Nazi officials gathered at the Wannsee Conference in Berlin to formalize what they called the final solution to the Jewish question. The plan was clear: the systematic extermination of Europe's Jewish population. Auschwitz, with its expanding facilities and rail access, was positioned to become the centerpiece of this operation. In March 1942, the first Jewish transports began arriving at Birkenau. They came from nearby ghettos at first, then from across occupied Europe, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Slovakia. As trains arrived, SS doctors carried out selections on the ramp. One motion of the hand decided who would live and who would die. Those judged fit to work were sent into the camp. The rest were sent directly to gas chambers disguised as showers. Families were separated within minutes of arrival. Belongings were taken and sorted in a section of the camp nicknamed Canada by prisoners because of the perceived wealth and abundance found in the looted goods. Clothes, jewelry, food, even photographs, all were taken, cataloged, and sent to Germany. By 1943, Auschwitz had reached peak efficiency as a killing center. Trains arrived daily from every corner of Nazi-controlled Europe: Greece, Italy, Hungary, Norway. The ramp at Birkenau became a place of constant movement, people stepping off crowded cattle cars, SS shouting orders, dogs barking, luggage being piled high. Within hours, entire transports could vanish, their passengers reduced to ash in the crematoria. Inside the camp, warehouses overflowed with stolen possessions, a silent record of the lives erased. The system was relentless. Every part of it, the barracks, the roll calls, the kapos, the punishments, the expansions, was part of a machinery designed for total control. But Auschwitz was only the beginning. The Nazis had even deadlier plans for its expansion. Birkenau, the engine of industrialized death. In the early months of the Nazi occupation, Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, had executed Jews, Roma, and other targeted groups by firing squad in fields, forests, and ravines. But Himmler and his commanders considered this method too slow, too public, and too psychologically taxing on the shooters. In September 1941, at Auschwitz, a new method was tested. Soviet prisoners of war were locked inside a sealed room in the basement of Block 11, and pellets of Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide, were dropped in. The gas killed them within minutes. It was cheap, fast, and left the killers at a physical distance from their victims. This experiment became the blueprint for Birkenau's main function. At first, gassings took place in 2 converted farmhouses on the edge of the camp, nicknamed Bunker 1, the Red House, and Bunker 2, the White House. The interiors were sealed, the windows bricked over, and the rooms fitted to hold hundreds of people at a time. Victims were told they would be showered and disinfected. Once the doors closed, guards in gas masks would pour Zyklon B through openings in the roof. Bodies were buried in mass graves nearby, the earth swelling and shifting as the gases from decomposition built up beneath the soil. By 1942, the Nazis sought something even more efficient. They turned to the German firm Topf und Söhne, which designed massive crematoria with integrated underground gas chambers. Crematoria 2 and 3 were almost identical, each with a capacity of about 2,000 people per gassing. Victims entered down a set of steps into what looked like a basement changing area, where they were ordered to undress and leave their belongings on numbered hooks, told they would retrieve them after showering. The gas chamber itself was fitted with hollow metal columns that allowed Zyklon B pellets to be dropped from above, spreading quickly through the space. Ventilation systems cleared the gas afterward, and freight elevators carried the corpses directly to the furnaces above. Crematoria 4 and V, built slightly later, were simpler, with above-ground gas chambers, but the same deadly purpose. Together, the 4 buildings could dispose of 4,756 bodies per day under ideal conditions, though the actual pace varied depending on the number of arrivals and the strain on equipment. The Nazis paired mechanical precision with calculated deception. Fake showerheads, carefully worded instructions, even the distribution of numbered claim tickets for clothing. All of it was meant to keep people calm until it was too late to resist. The dead did not simply disappear. The work of clearing the chambers fell to the Sonderkommando, a group of prisoners, mostly Jews, forced to carry out the grisly labor. They dragged bodies from the gas chambers, cut hair from women's heads, pulled gold fillings from teeth, and loaded the remains into the furnaces. Some Sonderkommando also tended open-air pyres when the crematoria could not keep up, especially during large transports. Their work was carried out under constant threat of death. Every few months, they were themselves killed and replaced, so no witnesses would remain. The scale of Birkenau's killing operations reached its peak in May 1944, when the Nazis began deporting Hungary's Jews. In just 8 weeks, about 400,000 men, women, and children arrived, most sent directly to the gas chambers. The crematoria could not handle the volume. Huge open-air burning pits were dug behind the buildings, their flames visible for miles. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning flesh, settling like a constant fog over the camp and nearby villages. By late 1944, with the Soviet army advancing, the Nazis began to destroy evidence of their crimes. Crematoria 2 and 3 were dismantled and dynamited in November. Documents were burned in huge piles. Ashes from the cremation pits were dumped into rivers or scattered in nearby fields. Yet even in their retreat, they continued killing, sending transports from across Europe until the very last weeks. Inside Birkenau's wire, the machinery of death had reached its most efficient form: cold, calculated, and unrelenting. It was not chaos, but design. and every piece of it had been built to erase human lives as quickly and quietly as possible. Killing methods: gas, bullets, experiments, and torture. Killing at Auschwitz was not confined to the gas chambers. Across the camp complex, death came in many forms. Some immediate, some stretched out over weeks or months. In Auschwitz I, the courtyard between blocks 10 and 11 became known as the Black Wall. Here, thousands of prisoners were executed by firing squad. The condemned were lined against a blackened surface designed to absorb bullets and prevent ricochets. Their deaths carried out in front of assembled guards. Executions could happen for sabotage, for attempting escape, or simply for falling out of favor with the SS. Inside Block 11 itself, prisoners endured the starvation cells and standing cells, tiny brick compartments where inmates were forced to remain upright in near darkness, 4 at a time, for days without food or water. Others died from lethal injections, most often administered by SS officer Joseph Clare, who was known to kill up to 60 prisoners in a single day with a shot of phenol directly into the heart. Just across the courtyard, Block 10 housed some of the camp's most notorious medical experiments. Joseph Mengele, the SS physician infamous as the Angel of Death, conducted studies on human twins, searching for ways to manipulate genetics in service of Nazi racial ideology. Between 1943 and 1944, about 1,500 pairs of twins passed through his hands. Only around 200 survived. The procedures ranged from harmless measurements to deliberate mutilation. In some cases, he attempted to create conjoined twins by sewing children together. Others had dye injected into their eyes to test if iris color could be changed. Mengele's experiments extended beyond twins. He studied people with physical differences, including the Monowitz family, a group of Jewish performers with dwarfism. They endured bone marrow extractions, repeated blood draws, and radiation exposure. Other doctors had their own projects. Karl Klauberg tested chemical methods of mass sterilization, injecting caustic substances into the uteruses of women, leaving them in agony and often killing them. Horst Schumann conducted sterilization experiments using high-dose X-rays, focusing especially on Roma prisoners. The burns left by these procedures became infected, leading to slow and painful deaths. Forced labor was another form of execution by attrition. Prisoners worked in stone quarries, carrying blocks weighing up to 50 kilograms up a 186-step staircase. The task was deliberately designed to break bodies quickly. Others were sent to drainage work details, where they stood waist-deep in icy water to clear swampy ground. Hypothermia claimed many lives long before a bullet or a beating could. Starvation was constant. The daily food ration was between 700 and 1,000 calories, watery soup, a crust of bread, and sometimes a sliver of sausage or margarine. Prisoners doing heavy labor burned far more energy than they consumed, leading to rapid weight loss. Within weeks, many became Muselmänner, a camp term for those so emaciated and weak they could barely move. They shuffled through roll call like walking skeletons, unable to work, waiting for death. Psychological torture threaded through every aspect of camp life. Families were separated upon arrival, sometimes within seconds of stepping off the train. Children were torn from their parents. Spouses saw each other one last time in the selection line. Arbitrary killings kept everyone on edge. No one could predict when their name, or simply their face, would catch the wrong attention. At any moment, a prisoner might be pulled from the ranks during roll call and sent directly to execution. Life at Auschwitz was designed to grind people down both physically and mentally. Even those who avoided the gas chambers lived under a shadow of constant threat. For some, death came quickly. For others, it arrived one beating, one skipped meal, one freezing work shift at a time. The camp's cruelty was not just in how many people it killed, but in how many ways it found to kill them. Even outside the gas chambers, daily life for prisoners was a slow-motion execution. Daily life in the camp: labor, survival, and resistance. The day at Auschwitz began long before sunrise. At around 4:30 in the morning, prisoners were driven from their bunks for roll call, or appel. Even in the dead of winter, they stood outside in thin striped uniforms, snow collecting on their shoulders, frost biting at their ears and fingers. The counting could last hours if the numbers didn't match the SS records, and any prisoner who collapsed from exhaustion or illness was often beaten or dragged away, never to return. After appel, the prisoners received their first meal of the day, a cup of black liquid called coffee, though it was little more than scorched grain and hot water. Work details began soon after. Labor was not only hard, but relentless, stretching for 11 to 12 hours under the watch of capos, prisoners given authority by the SS to enforce discipline. Some capos were brutal, wielding sticks and whips to keep men and women working at impossible speed, knowing that slowing down meant punishment or replacement. Work assignments varied. Some were sent to industrial plants like IG Farben's Buna factory, where they handled toxic chemicals. Others were ordered to haul bricks, dig drainage ditches, or carry massive stones. There were no gloves for winter, no breaks in the summer heat. Quotas were set so high that meeting them was almost impossible, ensuring constant exhaustion and injury. By midday, prisoners were issued a watery soup, often made from turnip tops or rotting vegetables. The smell alone could turn a stomach, yet it was devoured quickly. Hunger was stronger than disgust. In the evening, after the day's labor, the final ration arrived. Roughly 300 grams of bread, sometimes with a scrap of margarine, sausage, or jam. These portions barely kept anyone alive. Many traded part of their bread for a cigarette, a scrap of cloth, or other small favors, though doing so meant going even hungrier. The barracks were overcrowded far beyond their intended capacity. In buildings originally designed to house 52 horses, as many as 800 prisoners were crammed together. Wooden bunks were stacked 3 high, each narrow space holding 3 to 4 people. Mattresses were made of straw sacks that quickly became infested with lice and fleas. There was no heat in winter, and no real ventilation in summer. The latrines, long concrete troughs with no partitions, overflowed and stank so strongly that prisoners dreaded going inside, yet avoiding them was impossible. Typhus and dysentery spread easily in such conditions. Every prisoner wore a striped uniform marked with a colored triangle to indicate their category: red for political prisoners, green for criminals, black for those labeled asocial, pink for homosexual men, and yellow for Jews, often combined with another triangle to form a Star of David. These badges shaped how they were treated. Political prisoners sometimes received slightly better work assignments, while Jews bore the brunt of the harshest punishments and the highest death rates. Survival required resourcefulness and, often, the kindness of others. Prisoners who worked near kitchens or warehouses sometimes smuggled scraps of food to those in worse shape. Sharing was dangerous. If caught, both giver and receiver could be beaten or killed. But it was a lifeline for many. Secret acts of resistance also took place in quiet moments. Some prisoners whispered prayers in the barracks at night, or celebrated religious holidays in hidden corners. Others stole bits of paper and pencils to keep lists of the dead or record events, hoping the truth would survive, even if they did not. Yet the same overcrowding and deprivation that made solidarity essential also made it dangerous. Trust was scarce. Desperation could turn people against each other. The SS encouraged this by rewarding informants with extra food or easier assignments. Prisoners lived with the knowledge that a careless word, even to someone they thought they could trust, might cost their life. Day after day, the same cycle repeated: roll call, work, meager food, restless sleep in cold barracks. It was life stripped down to endurance, and every part of it was designed to break the body and spirit. And behind all of it, the hunger, the labor, the disease, was not just cruelty for cruelty's sake, but also cold economic calculation. A system built to squeeze every possible use from human beings before discarding them. Profiting from murder, the industry behind Auschwitz. Barely 5 kilometers from the gas chambers of Birkenau stood Monowitz, also known as Auschwitz III, an industrial plant where the German chemical conglomerate IG Farben formed one of the darkest corporate alliances in modern history. From the outside, it was a sprawling construction site of steel frames, smokestacks, and storage tanks. On paper, it was a factory for synthetic rubber and fuels, products the Nazi war machine desperately needed. In reality, it was built on the labor and lives of thousands of prisoners, worked until they collapsed and then replaced without pause. Construction began in 1941, with IG Farben choosing the site for its access to rail lines, raw materials, and, most importantly, a captive labor force supplied by the SS. By 1944, over 11,000 prisoners were held in Monowitz. Each was leased to IG Farben for 3 to 4 Reichsmarks a day, paid directly to the SS. There was no illusion about the arrangement. The prisoners were not employees. They were a resource to be consumed. The work was grueling and unending. 12-hour shifts were the norm, regardless of season. In winter, men and women staggered through freezing winds, their thin uniforms no match for the cold. In summer, the heat from the machinery mixed with the stench of chemicals, burning lungs and blistering skin. Toxic fumes hung in the air, and spills from vats of caustic substances burned deep into flesh. There was no safety equipment, no medical care beyond the most basic treatment meant to keep a prisoner standing long enough to finish the shift. Those who faltered faced beatings from guards or execution on the spot. The connection between IG Farben and Auschwitz's machinery of death ran deeper than forced labor. Through its subsidiary Degesch, the company manufactured Zyklon B, the pesticide adapted for mass killings in the gas chambers. Regular shipments left IG Farben facilities and arrived at Auschwitz, where the chemical became an instrument of industrial-scale murder. The same corporate entity that squeezed every ounce of labor from a prisoner at Monowitz also helped provide the means to kill them if they became too weak to work. Other corporate giants also fed on Auschwitz's captive labor pool. Krupp used inmates to produce munitions under brutal conditions. Siemens brought prisoners into workshops to assemble electrical parts. AEG exploited forced labor for wartime manufacturing. Each firm's profits were tied directly to the system the SS had perfected, one in which human beings could be worked to death or gassed and replaced with fresh transports from across occupied Europe. Survival at Monowitz was rare and often owed to luck. Prisoners referred to Buna death, a slow wasting away from hunger, chemical exposure, and exhaustion. Some were transferred to less lethal work details before their bodies gave out, but many never left the camp alive. The turnover rate was staggering. IG Farben managers complained not about the morality of this loss of life, but about the disruptions it caused to production schedules. When the war ended, the industrial ties to Auschwitz became a matter for the courts. At the Nuremberg trials, 24 IG Farben executives faced charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. They were accused of using slave labor, plundering resources from occupied territories, and supplying materials for the Holocaust. Yet the sentences were shockingly light. Most served only a few years in prison. By the mid-1950s, many had returned to positions of influence in the post-war German economy, their companies restructured, but thriving. This part of Auschwitz's history showed that the camp was not only an ideological weapon, but also an economic one. It was a place where profit and death were bound together, where the line between factory and killing center blurred until they were one and the same. The SS could destroy a life in the gas chamber in minutes, but at Monowitz and other labor sites, they could also strip that life of every ounce of labor first. And as the Third Reich's front lines collapsed, this same system, the partnership between industry and the SS, did not simply shut down. It moved with the retreat, taking its prisoners and its brutality on the road, dragging the machinery of exploitation into one final, deadly act. The final days, evacuation, death marches, and liberation. By the winter of 1944, the war had turned decisively against Germany. The Red Army was moving west through Poland, and the sound of artillery was closing in. In Auschwitz, the SS began dismantling the gas chambers and crematoria, desperate to destroy evidence of what had happened there. But their plan was not to free the prisoners. They intended to take them deeper into German territory, where the work camps and factories could still use their labor. On January 18, 1945, the evacuation began. Around 60,000 prisoners were forced from their barracks into the snow, told they were being moved to another camp. Many were